Tropes door. There she is on stage, spinning as she sprawls. Thank God the curtains fall. Her spring is sprung and dance is done. Spinning as she sprawls. Thank God the curtains fall.
Well, my experiment with Southern Gothic was met with a resounding meh. On to another genre, the creepypasta. For anyone unaware, creepypastas are a somewhat loosely defined genre of amateur horror stories posted on the internet. They are traditionally told from a first-person perspective, as if recounting a real event, but in recent years some stories have bucked this trend. It's an interesting genre, and I encourage anyone interested to explore it more. Picking an appropriate creepypasta, however, was more difficult. Many of the popular ones are quite short, have very little feminist content to comment on, or are just so terribly written that they don't merit consideration. Thankfully, Blumhouse.com shared a pasta called The Puppetmaster's Regime that seemed ideal. The story was written in 3 installments by the user Hagenisnotacat, who posted the story to the Creepypasta wiki between April 1st, 2012 and September 29th, 2013. The creepypasta makes ample use of both horror and terror, in the original sense of the words. Contrary to popular belief, these two words have very different meanings. Horror is the visceral reaction to grotesquerie, and terror is the anxiety that comes with the expectation of horror. This story uses pedophilia, a human evil, as an element of horror, and surreal puppets, an eldritch evil, as an element of terror. And it stirs the two together in a potent combination. The story, like Scream Queens, draws its audience in through the sublime, the natural attraction to the grotesque, as described by Edmund Burke. In Scream Queens, there's more of an even mix of sublime and beauty, the tart lemon with the sweet sugar. Here, it's 2 kinds of sublime, the tart lemon and the sudden knife to the gut. The narrator is an anonymous internet user with a geeky passion for mystery, uncovering the details of the mysterious 1934 off-Broadway play The Puppetmaster's Regime. He describes the results of his research as if just sharing something interesting, like internet nerds often do. The framing is similar to Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu's 1862 In a Glass Darkly anthology. This is a modern internet manifestation of a classic approach to horror fiction. What makes The Puppetmaster's Regime so intriguing to the narrator is its overt appeal to pedophiles and an apparent eldritch element associated with puppets. Like horror fans, he too is compelled by the sublime. The play itself has a horrific plot endorsing child grooming, and the way it was performed was terrific, of terror. Surreal and suggesting a dangerous eldritch puppet-related genesis. There was one showing of the play before a disaster backstage. Debris fell on and killed the child actors, and their bodies reportedly rose on puppet strings and were made to bow. The theater was evacuated, and the play was never put on again. The narrator scours interviews with theatergoers to put the pieces together as best as he can. He slowly paints a horrific picture, and the way he teases out the details is terrific. The narrator gathers information on at least 3 different versions of the story, which apparently went through multiple extensive revisions before its premiere. The play centers on a young boy named Narrator, who, along with his friends, becomes interested in a puppet show run by a pedophile named Mr. Obsessor, who takes a special interest in him. There is a fantastical element where a puppet dressed in black comes to life, takes Narrator into an alternate dimension, and sings to him in such a way as to allude to an endorsement of the puppet master's child grooming. The performance of the play involves both scared child actors, alluding to sexual abuse, and strange puppet imagery, suggesting an occult connection to an evil puppet deity. The pedophile character is such a strange element that it suggests that the creator himself might be a pedophile. Meanwhile, background actors walk in straight lines non-stop, as if they're animated puppets. Or at least cult members acting like animated puppets as a form of puppet worship.
You are so freaking creepy!
After finding out about this weird play, the narrator investigates the background details. He writes to the various people who own the theater after the production of Puppetmaster's Regime, and he is able to acquire a box containing artifacts from the production that helps him put the pieces together. He determines that the play was composed by a Garris Creeley, and he goes on to investigate his origins. Garrus's adoptive father, referred to as Mr. Sheridan, was a prolific child rapist. He produced child pornography, organized child burlesque displays for the benefit of other pedophiles, and he certainly raped Garrus himself. He was rather generically described as insane, and this insanity led him to create, or discover, a puppet deity named Podominus, which I think is Latin for Puppetmaster. Sheridan wrote the initial version of the play as a long, rambling novel, and he adapted it into a play that he marketed as a morality tale for all ages, but that would actually serve as a form of child rape propaganda to preach the idea that children have a responsibility to have sex with adults. The play itself as an object is a horrific pedophilic act, even as it also functions as a story within a story, with its own share of horror and terror. At least Angel has black comedy. This is full-on Lovecraft fever dream. Sheridan featured Garrus in the lead role of Moriator, and performed an early version of the play in 1928. Police found out about it, shut it down, and arrested Sheridan, but it was too late for Garrus's psyche. As Garrus grew up into a friendly Santa Claus-like man, despite dying at 18, take that as you will, he became fascinated by Sheridan. He tracked down the play and decided to revise it, and ultimately to bring it back in new form, with the pedophilia reduced to subtext, and with a greater focus on the puppet element. An implication would be that Sheridan's rape of Garrus as a child led to Garrus becoming a pedophile himself, and that he too has a connection to Podominus. It's a popular stereotype that people who suffer child rape are more likely to become pedophiles themselves, but the findings of scientific research are less clear. I have some issues with this depiction that I'll get into at the end. The narrator locates an elderly woman, Alice Corley James, who saw the 1934 play as a little girl, and he finagles his way into interviewing her personally. From her, he gets a look at some of the production notes written by her uncle, a choreographer. From that, he learns about the lead child actor, named Timothy Cartwright, with whom Garrus developed an obsession. He always met him alone in his office for special meetings, and never called anyone else in, even Timothy's understudy. The narrator also learns about the nonsensical chant that Garrus had the children learn in pieces, and made them practice but forbid them from saying it all the way through, except during the performance. There was then a news clipping of an interview with a police officer who investigated the theater following the disaster. Despite over 70 people swearing that they saw the cast dead, he was unable to find any bodies other than that of Garrus Creeley, who apparently shot himself in his office. Now, in the present, a mysterious revival of the play has emerged. The narrator goes to a showing with a camera and audio recorder. He describes the details of going to Chicago, staying with high school friends, going to the theater, receiving a playbill from a cheery older man, finding it odd that the playbill is in color, and settling down to watch. In the revival, a group of children in 18th century Germany meet an animated puppet, a puppet dressed in black, who may or may not be an actual animated puppet. The puppet starts telling them a story, and this is the framing device for the main plot about Moriator. Ah, great, another story within a story. The narrator proceeds to review the play. It feels like a typical review. He critiques the lyrics and likens the set pieces to other plays. However, a few of the details just hint of sinister content, like a song called I Can Hear Them Whisper. It's reminiscent of Welcome to Night Vale. Further revisions have apparently taken place, and there's a new section about what appears to be Podominus cultists mourning the loss of a young girl, who a man raped and murdered. The cultists drone a really creepy song about it. The rapist isn't a character past this scene, and it's really just a gratuitous piece of horror, but it totally fits the tone of the bizarre play. Finally, we get a bit of exposition delivered by the puppet in black to Moriator. According to him, pedophiles are locked in a vicious cycle of reincarnation. Whenever a pedophile dies, his soul enters a newborn child, destined to be raped himself, and to manifest as a child rapist later in life. Moriator is one such individual, and a boy that he raped in his previous life shows up as an old man, seeking to rape Moriator now. Moriator manages to escape, but is then inducted by Podominus for the Puppetmaster's regime. Back in the framing device, things get increasingly creepy, and then everything gets really weird as animated puppets chant the song that summons Predominus. A shout of fire causes the theater to be evacuated. The narrator escapes just before the building collapses. But 60 people are trapped inside. He glimpses the old man who handed him the playbill being carried into an ambulance. Later on, he examines the playbill and spots the old man who handed him the playbill, listed as director Timothy Cartwright, who was supposed to have died in 1934. The narrator realizes that the description Alice Corley James gave him didn't match Timothy Cartwright, meaning it must have been his understudy who performed and died that night. He thinks about the death of Garrus Creeley, billed a suicide, and he realizes that Timothy shot him. Like in the play, there is a vicious cycle of child rape. Sheridan put on the play and raped Garrus. Garrus ended up like Sheridan, and he also put on the play and raped Timothy. And Timothy shot Garrus, but ended up like him and put on the play himself. While it's unclear if he raped Milton Holiday, the modern actor of Moriator, it's certainly implied, and he also sacrificed a number of people to Predominus. The narrator notes that Milton Holiday survived, while it appears that Timothy did not, so the cycle continues. The creepypasta ends with the note that none of the bodies have been recovered. The figure of the pedophile is a source of both horror and terror. The very concept of an adult possessed with a compulsion to commit child rape is so abhorrent that to even register the word is shocking. Once we understand that there is a pedophile in play, the story switches to terror in the anticipation of the pedophile committing pedophilic acts, which are themselves instances of horror. The play can be considered a pedophilic act committed by the pedophilic playwrights, Sheridan, Garrus, and Timothy. It's self-containing the nested story within a story, with the same elements of horror and terror. The overarching plot repeats this pattern of a surface-level narrative with literal pedophiles and nested iterations of the play with fictional pedophiles. Puppets can cleanly fit into the uncanny valley. There is a universal fear that they might actually be possessed by evil spirits and might start moving of their own accord. The relation to pedophilia is less about puppets than the Puppetmaster. The child-grooming pedophile rapist acts as a controlling figure to young children in a way analogous to a puppet master controlling puppets. The main problem with the creepypasta is that there is not a strong marriage of the two elements. It's just sticking two different scary things in the same story. Thematically, it's similar to the works of H.P. Lovecraft, who wrote many of his stories in a first-person style, similar to the modern creepypasta. Its use of minimalistic descriptions of horror, and letting the reader fill in the blanks, is a very Lovecraftian use of terror. And the shocking nature of the subject matter is a modern equivalent to the effect he was trying to evoke in his racism, classism, and xenophobia, that we would now dismiss as irrational bigotry. The racist twist of Medusa's coil has zero horror to it now. But no one's going to be dismissing the grotesquerie of child rape. Besides the man in the White House. The use of the pedophile rapist figure allows for an enduring Lovecraftian repugnance. I do have issues with the cycle of reincarnation deal. I have the same problem with treating pedophilia as an item of folklore as I do psychopathy. Pedophilic disorder is a dangerous mental illness, roughly equivalent to schizophrenics who hear voices telling them to kill people. It's scary, but the danger at hand is the mental illness and the attitudes surrounding it, not magic soul transfer and rape destiny. Psychopaths, schizophrenics, and pedophiles can seek help and deal. They don't have to be violent. They can value society, the law, and they can choose a peaceful existence. This is what must happen, given that these people aren't just stories. They're here, and we have to live with them. Saying that people with violent compulsions must be violent because they don't really have a choice is irresponsible, because if they believe that, they're gonna be violent. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's also a strand of rape culture, a society that promotes rape. Saying that pedophiles will rape children is basically the boys will be boys argument taken to an extreme. And my shallow research on the subject of child molester psychology has me convinced that they're a close cousin of the misogynistic rape apologists that feminists deal with all the time. Feminists should oppose any ideology that says men don't have a choice but to rape. There is always a choice, and the choice to ignore all compassion and boundaries of society to commit the act of rape is what makes a rapist vile, not magic rape destiny. And on that note, there may be a link between being molested and becoming a molester, but the research is not conclusive. It is cruel to the victims of rape to presume that they would become rapists themselves. Child abuse isn't like being bitten by a werewolf, unless it's in Harry Potter. An example of a depiction of pedophilia that puts sole blame on the choice to be violent is with Fenrir Greyback, a villainous werewolf strongly implied to be a pedophile. Like all werewolves, he has the compulsion to be violent, and he has a particular preference to bite children. The children he bites who survive turn into werewolves themselves, each with the compulsion to be violent. In contrast to him, his victim Remus Lupin chooses to lock himself up on full moon nights and take efforts not to hurt anyone. There is also an extremely problematic conflation of pedophilia and homosexuality metaphors, but it correctly gets the part about responsibility for violence lying with the person afflicted with the compulsion to do violence. The creepypasta is also interesting to analyze with regard to gender roles. Though female characters are in the minority, there are a fair number of them sprinkled throughout. A paper the narrator references is written by a female psychologist from the 1990s, acknowledging how women can have such medical professions in the modern age, as opposed to the people he cites from earlier in the century. Noticeably, however, though there is one abusive teacher in one scene, there are no pedophiles, nor puppets, nor cultists that are stated to be female. This strikes me as derivative of the gender roles holding men as active agents and women as passive, male aggressors and female victims. Aside from being sexist, it's dangerous to perpetuate the assumption that pedophiles can't be women. It's a good creepypasta. Its subject is so horrific that I'm not sure it could be easily dramatized, but it would make a better miniseries than Candle Cove, to be sure. It's an effective homage to Lovecraft. I'm just not sold on its politics. Please like, share, subscribe, and support me on Patreon. Pledges of $5 or higher will give you early access and a personal thank you at the end of each video.